This is Scott Becker with the Becker Business and Becker Private Equity Podcast. I'm on today with Holly Buckley. Holly chairs healthcare at McGuireWoods. She lives at the intersection of healthcare and private equity. There are so many things going on in the healthcare private equity world, the good, the bad, the ugly. I was going to ask Holly for some of her thoughts on trends that she's watching in the healthcare private equity space today. Holly, tell us, what are 3 to 5 of the trends that you're watching in healthcare private equity? And I'll pick up on some of those with some of the questions that we have that we're watching and see what you think.
Yeah, that sounds great, Scott. And as always, thanks for having me on the podcast. So I think as an initial matter, we are seeing some really good transaction volume, which is always fun and exciting and good for many of us. And so I think we're seeing some larger deals, we're seeing some larger exits, we're seeing some good size, and I'm talking mainly on kind of mid-market healthcare private equity, but we're seeing good volume across the board in terms of new platforms, roll-up, and sell side. I think in terms of the buy side, if we look at the physician practice space specifically, I do think funds are a lot more careful and discerning in terms of the assets they're willing to invest in. And we see kind of much more robust thresholds that a target would need to meet in terms of being viable for a fund to actually make that investment. Because there's been so many investments in the physician practice management space that maybe haven't panned out as well as folks had hoped. And so there needs to be both good fundamentals on the front end as well as a long-term strategy for how to move on from the platform on the back end. And so I think a lot of this comes down to, can we derive value? Can we create value here? And how are we going to do that? Do we have the actual ability to do it? And then at the end of it, do we have an actual buyer who we could sell it to? So we're seeing good activity in spaces such as dentistry, which is kind of the gift that just keeps on giving. Oncology seems super busy these days, and even some of the other oldies but goodies such as ophthalmology are still seeing good transaction volume. I think one other kind of core theme that we would have to talk about on any podcast on healthcare and private equity is AI. And I think there the discussion is less about what AI assets can we invest in, but more how can we use AI to optimize our platforms. So thinking about things like documentation, coding, RCM, scheduling, call centers, patient engagement, productivity. So really looking in terms of how do we use AI to optimize and build up our investment to make it great, and lots of discussions on that. And then obviously the discussions that flow from there around things like data governance and policies and procedures and security and things like that. And then the final trend I would flag is just on state regulation. And we've talked about this a fair amount, but we continue to see a proliferation of state laws around both things like state transaction filing notices, as well as corporate practice and heightened scrutiny on physician practice management companies. And I think while the latter category creates more of a decision by investors in terms of, is this a state we want to go into, the former bucket really just puts additional timing and burden on the transaction in terms of kind of the work to get it done. So when you've got let's say a national or a almost national company, and you've got to look at state transaction laws in many states, and some of them are up to 180 days advance notice, it does create a big additional work stream, although we're generally not seeing states object and prohibit transactions from occurring. It just is a lot of additional work and hurdles to get through. And I think we can expect to see more of that moving forward, not less.
I mean, given that private equity, I think, controls or sponsors about 7% of the nation's physicians in total, and that one insurance company controls or employs about 10% of them, isn't it sort of ludicrous the amount of attention that private equity gets in healthcare from the regulators? Isn't it sort of ridiculous? They also control about 7% of hospitals. I just looked at a list of 12 hospital bankruptcies for this year. I think none of them were private equity funded. So the fact that places have challenges isn't unique to private equity. But given the small total numbers, it seems insane the amount of activity from the state legislatures and the noise from some of the federal people about private equity in healthcare. Any comments?
I just think it's yeah. I mean, I just think it's easy, right? It's the boogeyman. It's an easy common enemy. It's kind of like data centers, and so it's rather than actually rooting out the issues and managing kind of a broken system, it's easy to point at private equity and say this is the problem, and we're going to legislate around it and enforce around it. And it's activity without impact. And so I agree with you, but it's also not surprising.
No, I think that's right. And what are you seeing in areas like we're very close with some practices that have had some bad results in private equity? You know, even an orthopedic surgeon who said, even though he's gotten a couple different bites at the apple and it's going okay, he's ultimately not a fan of private equity in physician practices. What's the general tenor you're hearing out there? Certainly in some lower margin practices, it's been a real challenge. But what are you hearing out there from a physician standpoint versus a private equity standpoint as to the temperature on the view of private equity?
I think it's all across the board. I mean, I think we've definitely seen some really positive, well-aligned practices that have worked really well on every side. And the investors have done very well. The physicians have done well. They've retained clinical autonomy. They've also been able to grow and better service patients. They've been able to get capital investment in ways that wouldn't have been possible before. And then we've seen the other end of the spectrum where the platform hasn't done well. The physicians feel like they didn't get what they bargained for, and now in a way that their practice has been destroyed, and they're kind of trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces and separate and do something else. And so I don't know that there's a general tenor, Scott. I think that it really is just very investment dependent, and we definitely have seen some tremendous success stories where the vision was really materialized. There was less administration, less stress, more opportunity, more efficient, better care, and then we've again seen the opposite of that. So,
But isn't that the truth that it's really all over the place and that it becomes an easy target? But in terms of the general tenor, we see some platforms performing remarkably well and doing great work both for patients and for the physicians and the staff. And then some others where they've struggled, and but it's not necessarily binary that private equity is good or bad. It depends on the situation, the practice, the deal, the alignment, the amount of debt put on, the margins, and so many other things. It seems like.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's there's yes, all of those factors impact, and I don't. I'm a believer that there's not. It's very rare that the reason is bad people. I think in general, most people have good intentions and want things to work out well, and there's a number of factors that can impact that.
Thank you. No, I think that's exactly right. And then, Holly, let me ask you one further question. As you look into the next 6 months of this year, you look into next year, what's your crystal ball tell you about private equity activity, exits, deals, and stuff like that?
I think provided the overall economy continues in a relatively positive direction and we don't get plummeted into a deep dark recession, I think we're going to see continued strong deal volume. I don't think we're going to be gangbusters, but I think we're looking at a number of exits on the horizon, and so those are going to continue to come because they have to, and it's time. And so I think we're going to continue to see those transactions. I think we're going to continue to see the strategics build and continue to grow even bigger, but we are going to continue to see very selective buyers and a lot of broken deals where it just fundamentally doesn't end up making sense to close. And so we'll see the continued high break rates.
Thank you. No, I think that's right. It'll be a fascinating sort of 6 months in next year, and a lot of it does depend on just the overall tenor of the economy in terms of people's confidence in investing and putting money to work. I know private equity funds are still sitting on a crazy amount of money that they have to invest or want to invest, but they're also sitting on a lot of companies they want to exit. And I do see the private equity partners that I work with more excited to pursue some of those exits when they can get good numbers out now than I've seen in a long time.
That's right. If I may, I just wanted to do a quick plug. September 15th and 16th, we have our Healthcare Growth and Operations, or Healthcare Go conference in the great state of North Carolina, Charlotte specifically. So September 15th to 16th, the Ritz-Carlton in Charlotte. Really good agenda, really focused on portfolio company operations. We'll have a good amount of investors as well as operators there. If anyone is interested in attending, they are welcome to email me at hbuckley@McGuireWoods.com, or they can link through the hcgo.mcguirewoods.com website and sign up.
Fantastic. Yes, the Healthcare Growth and Operations Conference in Charlotte is one of the highlights of the year. Just absolutely fantastic meeting. We'll post something on that on LinkedIn as well today. Holly, I want to thank you for joining us today on the Becker Business and Becker Private Equity Podcast.
Thank you.